Imagine an island barely 8 square miles in size, barren, volcanic, and lifeless, yet so strategically vital that it became the stage for one of the fiercest battles in modern history. In early 1945, thousands of young soldiers, many not yet 20 years old, were sent to fight for control of this tiny patch of earth called Iwo Jima. What unfolded was not just a military operation, but a harrowing test of human endurance, sacrifice, and courage. Today, as we explore the Battle of Iwo Jima and the terrible price of its victory, we are not only learning about a pivotal moment in World War II, we are confronting the profound cost of war itself and the lasting lessons it leaves behind. The island of Iwo Jima, though small and barren, held immense strategic importance during World War II, particularly in the Pacific theater. Located about 750 miles south of mainland Japan, it was situated directly between the Mariana Islands, where American B-29 bombers were based, and the Japanese homeland. This position made it a critical objective for the United States as it advanced closer to Japan in the final phases of the war. At the time, American forces were launching sustained bombing raids over Japan using long-range B-29 Superfortress aircraft. These missions, while effective, faced significant logistical and tactical challenges. The distance between the Marianas and Japan was so great that bombers had limited room for error. If a plane was damaged or ran low on fuel, there were no nearby landing options. Many crews were forced to ditch into the sea or crash land. Iwo Jima offered a solution. Capturing the island would provide a desperately needed emergency landing site for damaged aircraft, potentially saving thousands of lives. Moreover, the Japanese had installed radar and fighter bases on Iwo Jima, which allowed them to detect and intercept American bombers before they reached Japan. By taking the island, U.S. forces could eliminate this early warning system, reducing the threat to their bombing missions. The island also contained 3 airfields that could be repurposed for American use, once in U.S. hands. These airfields allowed fighter planes to escort the bombers all the way to Japan and back, something that had not been possible before. In essence, the capture of Iwo Jima was not about territory in the traditional sense. It was about control of the air and the ability to bring the war closer to Japan with greater safety and efficiency. Military planners understood that success on this island would not only support ongoing air raids, but also set the stage for a potential invasion of the Japanese mainland. For all these reasons, the United States committed massive resources and manpower to take the island, despite knowing the Japanese defenders would fight to the last man. This decision underscores how geography, even a tiny speck of land, can play a decisive role in the outcome of global conflict. The Battle of Iwo Jima, which raged from February 19 to March 26, 1945, was one of the fiercest and most grueling confrontations in the Pacific theater of World War II. Fought between the United States Marine Corps and the Imperial Japanese Army, the battle was marked by relentless combat, harsh terrain, and an unwavering determination on both sides. What made Iwo Jima stand out among the many brutal engagements of the war was not only its strategic importance, but the astonishing intensity and scale of human suffering that unfolded over the course of just over a month. From the beginning, the American forces were under no illusion that this would be an easy victory. Japanese troops had fortified the island extensively in anticipation of an American invasion. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the Japanese commander, devised a brilliant and brutal defense strategy. Unlike in earlier Pacific battles where Japanese forces had engaged in banzai charges and direct confrontations, Kuribayashi planned a war of attrition. He transformed the island into a fortress, digging an elaborate network of underground tunnels, bunkers, pillboxes, and artillery positions carved deep into volcanic rock. These fortifications were nearly impervious to aerial bombardment or naval shelling. The island had no safe zones. The Japanese had covered virtually every approach with interlocking fields of fire. The United States responded with overwhelming force, Before the first Marines even set foot on the island, the U.S. Navy and Air Force bombarded Iwo Jima for 72 consecutive days, launching over 8,000 tons of bombs and more than 22,000 naval shells. However, this bombardment proved far less effective than hoped. Much of the Japanese defense infrastructure was underground and survived the onslaught, leaving the defenders ready and waiting. On the morning of February 19, 1945, more than 30,000 U.S. Marines landed on the southeastern beaches of Iwo Jima, marking the beginning of one of the bloodiest battles in American history. The Marines expected quick resistance, but were initially met with an eerie silence. The Japanese had been ordered not to fire during the initial landing, to lure the Americans into a false sense of security. Once the beaches were filled with men and equipment, the hidden Japanese artillery opened fire with devastating effect. Mortars, machine guns, and rockets rained down on the Marines from well-camouflaged positions on the high ground of Mount Suribachi and the surrounding areas. The terrain of Iwo Jima added to the horrors of combat. The island's volcanic ash was soft and loose, making it difficult for soldiers to dig protective foxholes or trenches. Vehicles became stuck, and movement was slow and exposed. There were no trees or vegetation to provide cover. Every step forward was met with sniper fire, mines, booby traps, and hidden machine gun nests. The Japanese defenders, completely hidden in their intricate tunnel systems, would emerge, attack, and disappear underground again, making it extremely difficult to dislodge them. Progress was measured in yards, not miles. Marines fought for days just to capture a single ridge or bunker. Casualties mounted quickly. The battle was so intense and the resistance so fierce that entire units were sometimes reduced to a handful of surviving men. Medics risked their lives to tend to the wounded, often under direct fire. Marines became experts in assaulting fortified positions, learning to coordinate flamethrowers, grenades, and demolitions to clear enemy bunkers, only to find the same position reoccupied hours later via the tunnel system. One of the most symbolic moments of the battle occurred on February 23, when 5 Marines and a Navy corpsman raised the American flag atop Mount Suribachi. This moment was captured in a now iconic photograph by Joe Rosenthal, symbolizing American perseverance and eventual triumph. However, this image, though inspiring, represented only one part of the battle. The fight for the island was far from over. In fact, some of the bloodiest and most difficult combat took place after the flag was raised. The northern part of the island, known for its rugged ridges and deeply entrenched defenders, proved to be an even greater challenge. The Japanese strategy of attrition worked effectively. Kurabayashi knew his forces could not win, but he intended to inflict as many casualties as possible and delay the American advance toward Japan. His troops fought to the death, rarely surrendering. The Japanese code of honor discouraged capitulation, and many soldiers chose suicide over capture. Some even pretended to surrender, only to detonate grenades when approached by American troops. This made U.S. forces understandably cautious and added another layer of psychological stress to the battle. As the days dragged on, the toll on both sides became unimaginable. The conditions were horrific: constant gunfire, deafening explosions, choking dust, and the ever-present smell of death. Water and food were scarce, and exhaustion set in quickly. Many Marines developed combat fatigue, what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress. Despite the odds, they continued to press forward, driven by duty, leadership, and the unbreakable bond between comrades. By March 26, the island was declared secure, although isolated pockets of resistance continued for weeks. The cost of victory was staggering. Nearly 7,000 American servicemen were killed and over 19,000 were wounded. It was the only battle in the Pacific where U.S. casualties exceeded those of the Japanese virtually all of whom had been ordered to fight to the death, suffered over 21,000 dead. Only a few hundred were taken prisoner, many of them unconscious or too injured to resist. The duration and brutality of the Battle of Iwo Jima left a lasting legacy. It exposed the horrifying intensity of modern warfare, especially when two highly determined forces collided in a confined and hostile environment. It also raised important questions about the cost of military objectives. While the island ultimately served its strategic purpose, allowing for emergency landings of over 20 B-29 bombers and saving thousands of airmen, the human price paid was almost unfathomable. For the Marines who fought there, Iwo Jima became sacred ground. It was a place where courage was tested, friendships were forged under fire, and where far too many young men gave their lives. The battle exemplified the unique hardships of Pacific warfare and the extreme resilience of those who endured it. Today, studying Iwo Jima allows us to understand the reality behind wartime decisions and reminds us that behind every military objective are thousands of individual stories of bravery, sacrifice, and the enduring will to overcome. The Battle of Iwo Jima, despite ending in an American victory, was marked by a staggering human cost that continues to be studied and mourned to this day. This battle, lasting just 36 days, became one of the deadliest encounters in the Pacific theater of World War II. It revealed the full extent of human sacrifice in war, by both the United States and Japan, and challenged the very notion of what victory means when achieved at such a terrible price. By February 1945, the United States was drawing closer to the Japanese mainland, and military planners identified Iwo Jima as a critical objective. Its location allowed for emergency landings of bombers returning from missions over Japan and provided a base for fighter escorts to protect American bombers. Because of this importance, the U.S. military committed a massive force to secure the island, knowing that the Japanese would defend it fiercely. They were correct. The Japanese defenders, numbering around 21,000, were well aware of their disadvantage in numbers and firepower, but they had one clear order: fight to the death. Surrender was not an option under the imperial command and cultural expectations. Every Japanese soldier on the island knew he was not expected to survive. For the United States, the invasion force was overwhelmingly large. Nearly 70,000 Marines and Navy personnel were deployed over the course of the battle. They arrived with heavy artillery, tanks, naval gunfire support, and aircraft bombardment. Yet, even with superior numbers and overwhelming firepower, the island was far from easy to take. The terrain was unforgiving, soft volcanic ash that offered no cover and made it nearly impossible to dig defensive positions. Worse still, the Japanese had built a vast underground tunnel system and a complex network of fortifications that made them nearly invisible and unreachable by pre-landing bombardments. The result was an enemy that appeared to strike from nowhere, vanishing into the earth after launching deadly attacks. From the first day, American casualties began to mount at a shocking rate. The beaches where Marines landed became death traps. Japanese artillery, hidden in caves and reinforced bunkers, rained down shells and machine gun fire as wave after wave of Marines came ashore. The wounded were often stranded in the open, and medics were frequently killed while attempting rescues. Even the most basic act of moving forward became an ordeal of life and death. Soldiers fought through minefields, booby traps, and relentless sniper fire. There were no front lines in the conventional sense. The Japanese tunnel system allowed defenders to move unseen and reappear behind American positions, creating a nightmarish environment of continuous combat and confusion. As the days wore on, the casualty lists grew longer. Young men, many just teenagers, were cut down before they ever had a chance to fire a shot. Entire squads were wiped out in single engagements. Officers, who often led from the front, suffered particularly high losses. Medical units were overwhelmed, and evacuation of the wounded was slow and dangerous. the psychological toll was immense. Marines watched their closest friends fall beside them. Many suffered from combat fatigue, a term used at the time to describe what we now understand as post-traumatic stress disorder. The constant stress of sudden attacks, coupled with exhaustion and grief, left a lasting mark on those who survived. By the time the battle ended in late March, the cost was devastating. Nearly 7,000 American servicemen had been killed. Over 19,000 more were wounded, many suffering lifelong injuries or trauma. To put that into perspective, the number of U.S. casualties on Iwo Jima exceeded those from the D-Day landings in Normandy, even though the island was far smaller and the battle shorter in duration. For the United States Marine Corps, it was one of the most costly battles in its history. The toll on the Japanese side was even more staggering in its finality. Of the approximately 21,000 Japanese troops who had been stationed on the island, fewer than 1,000 survived. Most died in battle or committed suicide rather than be captured. Japanese soldiers were taught that surrender was dishonorable and brought shame not only to themselves, but also to their families and their emperor. Many blew themselves up with grenades or staged last-ditch attacks when all hope was lost. The almost total annihilation of the Japanese garrison was not just a military loss. It was a human tragedy that reflected the depth of fanaticism and desperation that had taken hold by that stage of the war. It is important to remember that behind every statistic, there was a name, a face, and a life cut short. The thousands of American and Japanese soldiers who died on Iwo Jima were sons, brothers, husbands, and friends. Many of them were incredibly young, some still teenagers. They came from small towns, big cities, farms, and factories. They had dreams and families who waited for their return. Instead, they found themselves locked in a deadly struggle on a barren island thousands of miles from home. For those who did survive, the memories of Iwo Jima would never leave them. Many carried physical and emotional scars for the rest of their lives. Some never spoke about the battle, unable to put into words the horrors they had witnessed. The human cost of Iwo Jima raises profound questions about the nature of war and the meaning of victory. From a strategic standpoint, the battle achieved its objective. American bombers gained a safe haven for emergency landings. The island became a vital base for further operations in the Pacific, but at what cost? Thousands of lives were lost in just over a month. The island itself had no natural resources, no population, and no beauty. It was little more than a pile of ash and rock. Yet, because of its location, it became the site of one of the most intense and tragic clashes in modern military history. In the years since the war, both American and Japanese veterans have reflected on the terrible price paid on Iwo Jima. Many have expressed respect for the courage shown by their former enemies. Memorials now stand on the island, honoring the dead of both nations. These symbols remind us that, regardless of which side they fought on, the soldiers of Iwo Jima shared a common humanity. They suffered, they fought bravely, and they died far from home. For students and future generations, understanding the human cost of Iwo Jima is essential. It is not enough to memorize dates or study tactics. We must feel the weight of the sacrifice, recognize the scale of the suffering, and ask ourselves how we might prevent such tragedy in the future. War may sometimes be necessary, but it is never without consequence. The Battle of Iwo Jima stands as a stark reminder that every military gain comes with a human loss, and that the true cost of victory is always measured in lives. The image of the American flag being raised atop Mount Suribachi on the island of Iwo Jima is one of the most iconic photographs in the history of the United States, and indeed the world. Captured by Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal on February 23, 1945, just days into the bloody battle, it quickly became a symbol of American resilience, unity, and victory. However, as powerful as the photograph is, it represents only a small part of a much larger, far more complex and painful reality. The flag raising was not the end of the battle. It wasn't even halfway through. The fighting raged on for weeks after that moment, and it is essential to understand that behind the triumph captured in that single frame was a story of extreme hardship, immense sacrifice, and unparalleled courage by thousands of servicemen who fought and died in one of the most brutal campaigns of World War II. The flag raising took place on the 5th day of the Battle of Iwo Jima. By then, American forces had managed to fight their way up the slopes of Mount Suribachi, a dormant volcano that stood at the southern tip of the island. Capturing it was critical, not only for tactical reasons. It offered a commanding view of the beaches and inland terrain, but also for morale. As the Marines reached the summit, they hoisted the American flag, and for a brief moment, cheers erupted from troops below and from ships offshore. That initial flag was relatively small, and later replaced by a larger one to ensure it was visible from a greater distance. It was this second raising, involving 5 Marines and a Navy corpsman, that Rosenthal captured in his photograph. To the American public back home, the image of the flag raising was a powerful symbol of hope and impending victory. It was published in newspapers across the country and later used to rally national support during the 7th War Bond Drive. The photograph won a Pulitzer Prize and was eventually immortalized as the model for the Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington, Virginia. But to the men still fighting on Iwo Jima, the flag raising was a moment of pride overshadowed by the grim reality that the battle was far from over. In fact, the majority of the bloodshed occurred after the photograph was taken. While the capture of Mount Suribachi gave the Americans a tactical advantage in the southern part of the island, the Japanese defensive strategy was centered in the northern regions, particularly in the rough, rocky terrain known as the Motoyama Plateau. The Japanese commander, General Tadamichi Kurabayashi, had prepared his men for a war of attrition. They were ordered to dig in deep, using caves, tunnels, and bunkers to create an invisible network of deadly resistance. His aim was not to win the battle outright, but to inflict as many casualties as possible, to slow down the American advance, and to make the cost of victory so high that it would serve as a warning for what an invasion of the Japanese homeland would look like. As the fighting continued, American Marines encountered some of the most brutal combat conditions of the entire war. Every inch of ground was contested. Japanese defenders would emerge from hidden positions to launch surprise attacks, then disappear back into the tunnels. Entire platoons were wiped out, trying to take a single hill or fortified bunker. The volcanic ash covering the island made movement difficult, offered no protection, and created chaos in battlefield communication and logistics. Tanks got bogged down and wounded men had to be carried across open terrain under sniper fire. Casualties mounted quickly, and medics risked their lives every hour just to treat the injured. The courage shown by American forces under these conditions was extraordinary. These were mostly young men, many not yet 20 years old, who had been thrust into a nightmare of constant danger. They displayed remarkable bravery not only in attacking enemy positions, but in defending their fellow Marines, retrieving the wounded, and holding ground under heavy fire. There were countless individual acts of heroism, many of which went unrecognized at the time. 27 Medals of Honor, the United States' highest military decoration, were awarded to American servicemen for their actions on Iwo Jima, more than for any other battle in U.S. Marine Corps history. And yet, it's important to recognize that even the most heroic deeds did not guarantee survival. Of the 6 men in Rosenthal's famous photograph, 3, Sergeant Michael Strank, Corporal Harlon Bloch, and Private First Class Franklin Sousley, were killed in action in the days that followed. Their deaths remind us that the photograph, while inspiring, is also a solemn representation of the high cost paid by those who fought. It is not merely a symbol of victory, but also of sacrifice, loss, and endurance under unimaginable circumstances. The deeper meaning of the flag raising lies in what it represents about the nature of war and the people who fight it. It reminds us that symbols often carry complex truths. While the flag flying atop Mount Suribachi uplifted the spirits of Americans both at home and abroad, the men on the ground knew that the real work and the real suffering was still ahead. The photo captured a moment of collective pride, but it was bought with blood, and its legacy must always be viewed in light of that reality. Over time, the flag raising at Iwo Jima has come to symbolize the spirit of the Marine Corps and, more broadly, the values of courage, perseverance, and unity in the face of adversity. It honors not only those who raised the flag, but every individual who participated in the battle. These were people from all walks of life: farmers, factory workers, students, athletes united by a common cause and a shared willingness to endure unimaginable hardship for the sake of others. For students and future generations studying the Battle of Iwo Jima and the symbolism of the flag raising offers an important lesson about the complexities of war. It is a reminder that behind every iconic image lies a deeper story, one filled with sacrifice, loss, and the kind of bravery that defies easy explanation. The image endures not just because it captures victory, but because it represents the courage and humanity of those who bore the weight of that victory. To truly honor their legacy, we must remember not only the photograph, but everything it cost to make it possible. The Battle of Iwo Jima, though a tactical victory for the United States in World War II, continues to serve as a powerful reminder of the heavy human cost of war and the deep moral and historical lessons such battles leave behind. It was not just a military confrontation between two nations. It was a moment in history that revealed the depths of human endurance, the complexities of wartime decision-making, and the sobering reality that even the most strategically necessary victories can carry profound consequences. As we study the events of Iwo Jima today, we must not only focus on what was gained, but also on what was lost, and why remembering that loss is so crucial to how we understand history, conflict, and peace. Iwo Jima forces us to consider what it truly means to win in war. In terms of military objectives, the United States succeeded. The island, located halfway between the Marianas and Japan, became a critical emergency landing site for over 2 0B-29 bombers. Securing it helped protect aircrews returning from missions and allowed the U.S. to project its power even closer to the Japanese mainland. Strategically, the capture of Iwo Jima fulfilled its purpose, but achieving that purpose came at a staggering price. Nearly 7,000 American soldiers were killed and over 19,000 were wounded. On the Japanese side, nearly the entire garrison of 21,000 men perished, with only a few hundred taken prisoner. These were not just numbers, they were human beings, each with a story, a family, and a future that would never be realized. Reflecting on this cost challenges us to think beyond military calculations and assess the human dimension of war. The soldiers on both sides were mostly young men, many barely out of high school, fighting in conditions so brutal that survival was often determined by seconds or inches. They experienced terror, exhaustion, pain, and profound loss. For the survivors, the trauma of Iwo Jima did not end when the island was declared secure. Many carried physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. For the families of the dead, the price of victory was a lifetime of absence, grief, and unanswered questions. This reflection should lead us to ask not just what happened at Iwo Jima, but why it happened, and what it tells us about the broader nature of human conflict. World War II, with all its horror and scale, was in many ways a war driven by necessity, fought to stop expansionist aggression, protect democracy, and restore peace. Yet, even in a war many consider justified, battles like Iwo Jima reveal that every inch of ground gained came with the loss of countless lives. There is no clean victory in war, only degrees of loss. And even when victory is necessary, it is always accompanied by the question of whether that cost could have been reduced or avoided altogether. From a historical perspective, Iwo Jima also teaches us about the importance of preparation, intelligence, and understanding one's enemy. The United States bombarded the island for weeks before landing, expecting to weaken the Japanese defenses significantly. But the Japanese had built a vast underground network of tunnels and bunkers that rendered much of the bombardment ineffective. Their commander, General Tadamichi Kurabayashi, had studied American tactics and anticipated how the invasion would unfold. His troops were instructed to hold their fire during the initial landing, luring the Americans into a deadly trap once they had crowded the beaches. These strategies prolonged the battle and greatly increased the number of casualties. The lesson here is clear. Underestimating the enemy or over-relying on firepower without fully understanding the conditions on the ground can lead to devastating results, no matter how advanced one's military might may be. On a deeper moral level, Iwo Jima forces us to confront the nature of sacrifice. The soldiers who fought there did not choose the island or the war. They were sent, often with little warning or preparation for what they would face. And yet they fought with incredible bravery and commitment. Their actions reflected a sense of duty to their country, to their fellow soldiers, and to the mission they were given. This sense of duty is worthy of respect and remembrance. But as educators and students of history, we must go further. We must ask what responsibility leaders and societies hold when they send young people into such situations. Are we doing everything possible to avoid war? Are we valuing human life above political or strategic gain? Are we learning from past mistakes or repeating them in new forms? The memory of Iwo Jima is preserved today through memorials, museums, and the stories of veterans. These are not just symbols of a past victory, they are warnings and lessons for the future. When we look at the famous photograph of the flag being raised on Mount Suribachi, we must look beyond the image and remember the days of horror that followed. We must think about the lives that ended in silence, far from home, in service of a cause they believed in, even if they did not fully understand it. For younger generations especially, studying battles like Iwo Jima is essential not only to understand history, but to develop critical thinking about the role of conflict in human affairs. War is often taught through timelines, maps, and outcomes, but behind every arrow drawn on a battlefield map are the lived experiences of individuals whose pain and bravery are difficult to comprehend. By focusing on the moral and human cost, students can begin to see history not as a collection of dates and events, but as a story of people, real people, who lived, fought, and died in circumstances most of us can barely imagine. In this way, the Battle of Iwo Jima becomes not just a chapter in a textbook, but a mirror through which we view our own values. It challenges us to ask what we consider worth fighting for, what sacrifices we are willing to make, and how we honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice. Remembering the terrible price of victory on Iwo Jima is not an act of mourning alone. It is a call to responsibility. It reminds us that freedom, peace, and justice are never truly free. They come with burdens we must carry forward, not in guilt, but in gratitude and awareness. As we reflect on Iwo Jima today, in classrooms, in commemorations, or in quiet study, we are doing more than recalling a battle. We are engaging in the act of remembrance. And in that remembrance lies the hope that future generations may learn enough from the past to choose peace when possible, to prepare wisely when it is not, and to always honor the human cost that comes with any decision to go to war.